Welcome to the second in a series of podcasts from the Crystal Report in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm pleased to have as my guest a longtime friend and someone who I greatly respect in the gambling industry, David Wolfe. What we're trying to do at the Crystal Report is really offer a real and unedited version of the people, the movers and shakers behind the gambling industry and the gambling lifestyle. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Steve. Nice to be here.
When I say gambling lifestyle, what does that mean to you?
Gambling lifestyle? I mean, it's changed so much, right? I think about 25 years ago, gambling lifestyle was really physical, going to a physical property. And if I even think about it, in 1992, there were really only two states, just New Jersey and Nevada. And then there's such a proliferation, Mississippi, Iowa. The Native American gaming has grown. Now we're into internet, social media, various types of lotteries. I mean, it's just incredible how much it's expanded. And I think a lot of it has to do with technology, like so many other aspects of our life.
Right.
Yeah, it's really changed.
David, I know that your background has been on the financial side of the gambling industry, analyzing and supporting companies in the world financial markets. As you know, over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen more and more companies go corporate. We've seen a lot of mergers and acquisitions. A lot of people think playing the stock market is like gambling, but you've actually combined both. You've combined analyzing and following these companies, plus making bets year in and year out on which companies are going to outperform the market. Tell us a little bit about what got you started in the gambling industry.
Sure. I actually, when I started my career in Wall Street, I actually was an associate analyst for a portfolio manager in the healthcare industry, at a hedge fund, one of the very early hedge funds. And they wanted me to find my own sector. And as I was talking about, this was about 1990, and it seemed like gaming would be a very interesting prospect or prospective industry to follow because, as I said, there are really only two states, New Jersey, Atlantic City, where you and I come from, and of course out here in Nevada. So I took it upon myself to fly down to Mississippi and see some of the markets that were being built, and it was incredible. I'll never forget going to Moon's Landing, which is Tunica, which is outside of Memphis. And it was all license plates from Memphis, and then you would go down to the Gulf Coast, the Redneck Riviera, sometimes nicknamed, but again, all the license plates are Florida, and Louisiana from more of the New Orleans market. And on a Monday, they were at capacity. And so I came back to New York and I said, we've got to get invested in these. And a lot of these names don't even exist anymore. Casino Magic, Grand Casinos. I mean, I know you know them. A lot of people don't remember them. And it was just a massive bull market. And
some of those were the most high-flying stocks of any stock in those years.
Yeah, absolutely. They were the internet stocks before the internet, before Gore created the internet.
As we fast forward, David, and we contemplate such things as the legalization of sports betting, should the Supreme Court decide this summer to legalize sports betting, do you see that as being a similar catalyst to the expansion of gambling in the 80s and 90s? Is that possible?
Again, everything's always a little different. It's I guess I would say it's a little different this time, but I think if New Jersey wins, the markets it'll almost be a domino effect. Pennsylvania, my home state, I don't think will be very far behind. Their recent patchwork to put a budget together, and I'm sorry, Governor Wolfe, was deplorable, and they really need to find better revenue streams. there's other states already talking about venues, and I had some recent conversations with some very senior managements at some of the public gaming companies here in Nevada, and they were asking me, which is nice, how are you playing this through public companies? So I do think it'll create some growth, and I don't know if your next question is going to be how do you play that, but
Well, we'll come back to it.
Okay.
I think let's take a step back and let's talk about, you've been analyzing companies, you've been making bets with tens and hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. Let's go back to the basics. What do you look for when you engage with a public company? What are the attributes? What are the factors that make a difference to you?
And that's a great question. I think first and foremost, and I learned this from my mentor, and now that I'm a grizzled old man, it resonates very deeply with me. First and foremost is the management. If I don't get a good feeling, and you've been there with me, no names, but we've had experiences with good managements that are loosely framed, or good with ideas, but loosely framed in execution, and I've walked away. So a lot of it has to depend on the competency and the confidence you have in the management. I can give you a great example of a good management if you want, but
Sure.
yeah.
Sure.
So 4 years ago, the Pinnacle management basically turned over. And nothing against the prior management.
Well, tell us more about Pinnacle.
Okay, so Pinnacle is a regional casino operator. So they are not here in our fair state. They're in Indiana. They're in Louisiana. They have very big exposure there. They recently made an acquisition in Pennsylvania. They're in Iowa. So these are what used to be the riverboats, and properties that basically are usually on a river because of the initial laws in the 90s. Anyway, this management was just very proactive in running, first of all, a great culture, and then internally. And then they were watching expenses. They were cutting back their marketing, which is the single biggest bucket of costs. And then they looked into selling their real estate, which now, I think a lot of people realize a lot of these companies, they sell their real estate to real estate investment trusts, and they reap a pretty big gain. Anyway, long story short, if you take Pinnacle from about just over 3.5 years ago, the stock was about $10. And what I love is they put up their own skin in the game, not just the CEO, but down to the treasurer and below. I mean, not just what they were getting awards in and options. Anyway, between the real estate sale that they made, and they listened to their shareholders, us being one of them, a firm called H.G. Vora at the time was a large shareholder, another one. Their board really took quite an undertaking in terms of the study of the benefits and also the possible liabilities of being an operating company. Long story short is that $10 stock, call it 3.5 years ago, all in today because they just sold to Penn National Management, is about a $60 stock. So their returns relative, to the gaming industry, which had a great year last year, is unprecedented. So again, comes down to management first.
So if that's an example, Pinnacle is an example where you felt there was an outstanding management team. They listened to their investors. They made some strategic moves. Give me an example of the opposite as kind of a cautionary tale for other companies that are emerging.
The other thing you have to be aware of, and sometimes it can be to your benefit, is the balance sheet. Sometimes companies get a little ahead of themselves, out in front of their skis, so to speak, and put a lot of risk, excessive risk, into their marketplace. I'm going to give you an example because they've had a really good rebound from it, but a company like Boyd Entertainment, when they were going to come to the Strip, they basically were building a project which had debt that was coming on the books that was bigger than their entire company.
So they're a local and regional operator, and they were trying to become a strip player.
And they put, again, what were the chances of the housing crisis hitting, while they were doing that? But it happened, and they had excessive risk on, and had they chosen to go through with that project, they might not have come through the other side. So as we all know, they stopped, and they went back to their basics, which is the local casinos and the regions, and they've had great returns for their investors most recently, and they're disciplined. They got back to their discipline, and they've done very well.
Awesome. So and as someone who, you're obviously, when these companies get ready to issue debt, when they get ready to issue additional equity, when they do mergers and acquisitions, they're mindful of how people like you play in the ecosystem around how to treat the stock. So tell me a little bit about that relationship and how I know that you've made Las Vegas your home for most of the time between New York City and Las Vegas, and I know that one of the things you do is you're very up close and personal with these companies. So tell me about the nature of that relationship.
Sure. There have been a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the space. You're absolutely right. And the senior managements at these large companies, whether it's MGM or a smaller company like Eldorado in Reno, are very mindful of what the investment community will think about an acquisition. So ultimately, the acquisitions have to be accretive. And what I mean accretive is they have to produce more cash flow than they're laying out in additional debt to make the acquisition or equity. That's usually what myself and my fellow compatriots, brethren, and competitors all look for. There's always synergies, because if you have two actual public companies, there's a lot of duplicity. You get rid of the listing costs, you usually go down to one auditor, you get some scale benefits. Obviously, at the corporate level, there's only one CEO, CFO, treasurer, so there's savings in that level. But even at the private level, again, I'll use Boyd when they bought the Rampart properties. They were able to basically get some benefits, and Aliante as well. They were able to get, again, through their player management system, they were able to scale down some of the costs. And
but do you feel like they shoot straight with you? You feel like you're trying to be spun? Is it a dance, or is it by this time they know what you're relying on, they know what metrics you're going to look like, and they try to make the argument on the merits? Is it some of both?
No, it is a dance. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you just take buyer beware. If you just take what they say at face value and you don't do your own work, shame on you. I mean, it's like going out and buying anything in your lifestyle. If you go out and buy a car from someone and they tell you everything's fine, and you don't bring someone to go under the hood and look at it, and then you find out later that it has a bunch of broken hoses, or crack in the frame, or shame on you for not taking the time and the diligence. And that's what I'm paid for. At the various employers I've had over the years is now over 20 years of experience. And being able to call out how you get from point A to point B.
So let's take some of the companies, some of whom you've worked with directly. Let's take MGM and Jim Urin, who you've worked for. Clearly, a company that really went out over its skis with City Center, and then the recession came. They had intervention from Senator Harry Reid, which got them over the hump, and now it's a whole different story, a company that seems to be on a meteoric rise. what can you say about someone like Jim Murin, who's such a kind of a legend in our industry? What can you say about him in terms of how he's operated over this period of time and their future?
Yeah. So Jim and I actually worked at the same Wall Street firm out of college, a small firm called C.J. Lawrence, which was actually bought by a British bank called Morgan Grenfell, and ultimately Deutsche Bank bought Morgan Grenfell, as well as Bankers Trust, and now somewhere in there is C.J. Lawrence in the large universe of Deutsche Bank. But Jim was actually covered the leisure industry. He actually covered restaurants, hotels, and gaming. And he was a good analyst. That was before he came here to Nevada as the CFO of MGM. So sure, MGM, I was just talking about Boyd and their property on the Strip, and unfortunately, MGM got caught up in this, because you have to plan these projects years in advance. You don't know what's on the horizon as it's coming out of the ground, and there's three plus years in the making. And again, that was just I hope we never see anything quite like 2007, 2008 in our lifetime. Yeah, they were over-levered, and it was all defense. Obviously, for everybody here in town knows, and if you're watching this market, Vegas has had a really nice rebound. I think it took later for Vegas to recover, partially because there was a lot of room inventory that came in right as the recession hit hardest.
So you think Vegas is healthy now?
Oh yeah, I actually think that Vegas is in, at least the local economy, in very good shape. The housing inventory is not out of control like it was in '07. I mean, we have to be mindful that it can get out of control, but it's not. The economy is diversifying here. Honestly, in my opinion, with the new tax codes, I think Nevada is probably going to be a big beneficiary from people who have flexible options in their employment in California with a limited amount of deductions. I pay New York taxes. Obviously, that's a big hit to me. If I can completely get out of New York taxes, I will.
Right.
Even though I'm a resident here, I pay New York taxes because I spend percentage of my time there.
So the local economy seems strong, which favors companies like Boyd and Stations. But in terms of the tourists and how they're spending money, you feel the demographics are changing, obviously, but you feel good about these public company stocks who have large shares like Caesars and MGM on the Strip. You feel good about their futures here?
I feel better about the local economy oriented stocks. So obviously that would be Red Rock has the single highest exposure. Boyd, then actually Golden Gaming has almost their entire exposure here in Las Vegas. The issue with the Strip oriented properties is they've done really well at diversifying the revenue streams. Obviously, the hotels, and then there's they've done really well in terms of building the group sales up. So it's not just the transient, person who comes in to game, the clubs, the restaurants. But look, it's the management's responsibility at those companies to find the threshold of pricing.
So like charging for parking, you might have them revisit that decision.
It's not my place to tell them what to do or not to do. I think they're doing quite well with the parking, but I think there's also a backlash of it. Some people in my side of the industry call it stealth pricing. So they're charging for parking, they're charging resort fees.
Right.
So
$10 for a Coca-Cola, maybe more.
$4 for a round ice cube in whiskey. There's a little bit of, there might be a bit of fatigue. Again, I don't know this to be an exact number, so I caution this. This is not my research, but someone that I have a high regard for. I think it's no secret that this year's New Year's Eve was not great.
Right.
It some of the better value for the consumer in some time. The rates were just not what we're used to seeing, and the minimum night stays, etc. What I have heard, and we might see this possibly in an article, is that I think Airbnb has almost doubled its business in that same time period. And again, so you're dealing with an option of a place to stay, no resort fee, no taxes, on the hotel room, and you're just 15 minutes off the strip, but you Uber it in. You can still go party, but you can probably save yourself a lot of money. And actually, I looked at the Airbnb inventory recently in Las Vegas. It's quite nice.
Yeah.
There's some really competitive product.
Yeah.
I mean, the hotels here are a great value.
Yeah.
So.
So now, before we move on to other areas of the gambling industry, Caesars came through bankruptcy. They have new management, not from the gaming industry. It seems like things are healthy at Caesars. It seems like they're on the move and aggressive since they're coming out of bankruptcy. How do you view the company and its recent moves?
Again, some of my brethren in the hedge fund world and what we call long only, so it's sort of like ERISA money or mutual funds. Basically, they have they're more restricted in terms of how they can invest. But when I say long only, it means that they are usually entities that only own stocks. At my firm, we can short stocks too, and that's the true definition, by the way, of hedge. Hedge funds have taken on such different variations of what a hedge fund is. Hedge fund these days, to me, a lot of times just means you're leveraged. But a true hedge fund is supposed to be a long-short fund in some regards, where you're supposed to minimize your market risk. If the market goes down, you're supposed to make money. If the market goes up, you're supposed to make money. And the most difficult, by the way, performance is when the market is straight up, because we have stuff that weighs us down. And so having said that, Caesars, yes, they've come through the other side. Again, what I told you, I guess at the beginning of the podcast, management to me is the most important aspect. I'm getting to know some of their management, a lot of their operating management out in the regions, because they're not only on the Strip as the Caesars we know it, or Planet Hollywood, or the Rio, but they have, I'm sure your listeners know, they're in many regions. A lot of their senior management that ran those properties left, and they went to companies like Pinnacle or Penn. So I'm still getting to know the management there, and look, there's two sides to the coin on this one. Some guys think it's a stock that's going into the high teens, and there's some people that think that there's some risk to their execution that they're laying out.
I have a very non-scientific test that I use. As someone who lives in town, I visit these casinos, and the test I use sometimes is as simple as, when I go into a Caesars property or an MGM property, do I feel like the employees are being attentive? Do I feel like they care about things are clean and they're on top of their job? And if I see that, it gives me confidence that they're operating on all cylinders. And I would say I have seen that when I go into the Caesars properties. So I feel it's not scientific, but I feel good about that.
By the way, that's to the old school guys like me, that's real research.
Yeah.
Going out, kicking the tires. I do that too. So I'll actually reverse here. Who do you think has the most attentive employees and most engaged employees of all the operators on the Strip?
I always used to think it was Wynn.
Yeah.
because they go for a 5-star rating every year, and they achieve it, and they use secret shoppers, and this is their mantra.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Their employees are very attentive. That's not to take away from the other operators. I do think things are improving at Caesars, and again, in my world, it's sometimes as simple as some investment firms just think that they're basically at the point where a few years ago MGM took a lot of costs. As I was talking about, when they came through the other side, they were able to take costs out of after they got their balance sheet in order, and basically went from defense to offense, so to speak. So Caesars is now kind of at that same place, and now they'll be able to take some costs out, at the central level, at the property levels, and so I don't disagree with guys about that. I just I'm just a little reluctant at this point because I need a little better comfort factor.
With getting to know them.
Yeah.
So you and I speak a lot. We share information. We share our thoughts in terms of the future of the gambling industry. Obviously, actual gambling revenues have been, at least here in Las Vegas, have been a smaller and smaller part of the overall revenue, with nightclubs and restaurants and entertainment and retail picking up the slack there. Obviously, long term, there's a worry because we have younger folks, millennials, coming into the gambling industry. And obviously that imbalance is not healthy long term. So you and I, as professionals, spend a lot of time thinking about what should be the technology of the future, not only to achieve cost savings, but on the game side, on the things that provide entertainment. So I know you invest on the equipment side, and I know you're somewhat of an expert on slot machines and the economics behind slot machines. What are some impressions you have looking at the future on the equipment side?
Yeah.
And companies that you might like in that regard?
Yeah. That's, I think every company involved with gaming, whether they're an operator with a floor or they're interactive in the net, or they're an equipment manufacturer down the street or overseas, I think everybody's trying to find that sweet spot with the millennials to find what works for them. Certainly you're involved with esports, and that's been just a prolific growth overall, and yet with the casinos, they have yet to find something on a large scale basis that's able to drive that group into their operations, where they have tournaments, but they're interested in playing, their game, so to speak. They're not really interested in that much more on the floor.
I get feedback, questions through different, either through my Twitter at Stephen A. Crystal or through my website at Stephen A. Crystal ESQ. One question from Michael is, he's read about skill-based slots. What's your opinion? What is a skill-based slot? What do you think the future of skill-based slots is?
Great question. I think the first iteration, like so many things in so many industries, has not gone, I don't want to say, it's by no means a failure, but it's basically, it's going to take sort of a redevelopment and reinvestment. So something like a gamblet, I think it's a great approach, and it was novel, but it's going to take further iterations to get it to the point where a guy like me can actually put it on a spreadsheet, take a 3 to 5 year profile on it, and get to sort of a target.
So in that example, Gamblet, they basically had a kind of an arcade style
Right.
video game platform that more than one player could play. with a skill element, although it's still random like a slot machine. I think they raised and spent from major hedge funds something like 70 to 100 million.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about that. I mean, you deal with a lot of public companies, but if I get involved with more startups and emerging companies. It's very expensive to get into the gaming industry. So what have you seen as the normal course for a company like Gambler?
Yeah, I mean that's the problem. They're not at the point where they can generate. They're generating. First of all, they're not at any kind of scale. Not that they should be. They're a startup, and they're trying to find that sweet spot that we just talked about. So it burns a lot of cash, takes a lot of effort, engineers, and cost, and then you've got to get through to the other side. So where I am in the capital structure, I'm not tolerant of that. I need companies that are basically producing cash, can reinvest it, and continue to grow. And that's not to say, obviously, just like you said, there are people at the venture level, and believe me, when these companies hit, whether it's an Uber and you got involved at the very entry level, I mean, you're doing pretty well on paper.
Right.
Getting back to the games themselves, I mean, one of the problems that you're going to have is, again, if it's skill based, it depends on the age group. Skill based for like a bonus round, on sort of something that's already in the marketplace, like a slot product, where maybe you get to a combination and you're put into a bonus round against other players that also hit the combination, and you're playing something like Pong or trivia. Well, I don't have a problem with that. That's, someone that could be 10, 15 years older than me, 10, 15 years younger. I don't have a problem with that at all. But me personally, I'm not going to go into an arcade type game or like a Madden type setup. I can't play those games. I have five
What
thumbs.
about along those? What you're describing is the old shark and minnow.
Yeah.
That you don't want to go up against someone who's going to kick your butt. You want a chance.
Right. Back when poker, was running rampant on the internet here, before the government really clamped down on it, there's sharks and minnows, and everyone from Europe loved coming in and getting the fish in the U.S. Guys that wanted to play on the draw, and these guys were playing 5 and 6 screens at a time. And if you're playing guys that are much more skilled than you, I mean, how many times are you going to at anything? I mean, if you play chess and you get beaten by a guy 10 times in a row in 15 minutes or less, I mean, are you really going to go to the 11th game?
Well, and a lot of what I see, because I as you know, I deal a lot with peer-to-peer gaming, which I think is a future. I think the competition, whether it used to be poker, now the poker rooms are declining, but the notion with young folks of competing, as long as there's some skill matching, as long as it's fair, I think is compelling. And I think we're going to see more of it. Now, fantasy sports, I know that you paid attention like we all did when FanDuel and DraftKings had their meteoric rise, and then the regulator stepped in and threw cold water because they were aggressive and were playing fast and loose. What do you think of that industry now, particularly as we move towards legalized sports betting?
Yeah, I'll tell you, again, this is just my opinion, but they hurt themselves very badly when they were just promoting through the media, when it seemed like every other commercial on an NFL game or on a sports channel, whether it was Fox Sports, was DraftKings or FanDuel. I mean, it was crazy, and it didn't take too long for someone in my field to figure this is going to raise some flags, whether this is gambling or not. Yeah, I think there's a place for all of this. I mean, I think there's a place. There's talk about being able to do wagers. Let's face it, whether sports betting is legal in New Jersey or not, let's be clear, it's happening, yeah. and in a large way. and in Pennsylvania and in Massachusetts and just about every state. Same thing out on the golf course. I have friends who play for $5 a hole. I have guys that I know that play for well over.
Inc. Magazine's fastest growing company in America was skills.com.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. They're not public, so we don't know what their balance sheet is, but they raise money routinely, and all they're doing is facilitating peer-to-peer competition.
Right.
So obviously it's out there, and we're going to see more of it. Let's digress a little bit and talk about, I know just from knowing you that you are put in a position a lot of times of mentoring young folks, either about their career choices, particularly if they express an interest in Wall Street. Tell me what you would say to them, having had a career in Wall Street. Would you recommend it? What advice would you have for them?
I've really enjoyed what I've done. It's a lot different today than it was 20 years ago. The roles have changed quite a bit.
It's not like the show Billions.
That show is actually, I think, fairly accurate. I actually worked for 8 years at the company that is supposed to be Axe Capital.
Got it.
Which was a firm in Connecticut. So I actually think that show is more accurate than.
Did you ever feel, in working as a young person in that type of environment, did you ever feel uncomfortable with something you were asked to do? Is this a part of reality of Wall Street?
It is. I have been put in a position historically, nothing in the last 2 jobs, but where you had to make a choice, what was the right thing to do. And there's always pressure at these firms to, a lot of times, to maximize the profitability. Even in the NFL, you talk about cheaters and what have you. So you have to make a decision.
Now you've been able. I know you just as a person, you have your ethics and your standards, and you keep true to them. So in talking to a young person, these are people who are more likely to buy cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, than they are to invest in a stock.
Yeah.
So what do you tell them?
Listen, for the guys that have bought Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies and have and done well, God bless them. I think that's great. To me, it's the next sort of it's this generation's gold era,
Right.
Striking for gold. My nephew basically got involved. He got involved with Bitcoin pretty early, and honestly, I really knew very little about it. And I've only learned more recently because it's just become more prevalent, around me. The older guys say, beware, it's going to crash just like every other piece of
everything crashes eventually.
Right. I would just say I'd be careful because it's not really backed by a government. I think there's some foreign groups that are buying this possibly more than the domestic interest in it right now, and I understand why they're buying it. Their currency is getting devalued every year.
Well, I had heard. I signed up finally. I was asked about 100 times to serve as an advisor on an ICO, an initial coin offering.
I saw that.
And I said yes, ultimately, in esports, which is the ecosystem I'm involved with, there are markets of people who share a love for that. And therefore, I felt as long as there was a market where people were giving value to it, that it had a good chance to succeed. But needless to say, it seems uncharted territory. No one feels comfortable being involved in something that they cannot understand 100%.
Yeah. Let me get back to what you were saying, though. I mean, so my family My parents are both physicians, both self-made. I mean, my father's father passed away when I was 14. He joined the Navy because it was the only way to get his education paid for. My mom was the youngest, or is the youngest, of 14 kids on Taylor salary in Long Island. But I came into contact about halfway through when I was in college and realized that I was too small and, let's face it, no skills compared to our hockey team here in Vegas.
Right.
Yeah, that I better actually like look for something, a career. I was able to find a friend of the family. He actually lived down the street from us, and I did an internship with him, and I kept working with when I went back to school on projects, and a couple of the analysts wanted to bring me back afterwards. I did anything I could to get that door open, and once I got it open, I did everything I could to make the most out of it. And I will say that's not any different today. I don't care how you get in, just, well, to a reasonable degree, but you network, be persistent, do anything you can. Don't expect, to get necessarily a desk job. If you got to go work in the file room and, get everything in order, so be it. If you're running lunch orders for these guys or anything you can to get the exposure to get to the next step. And that just doesn't change. Now listen, if you're listening to this podcast and you're top of your class at Harvard and you've already had, Citadel management and, Goldman Sachs coming through, you don't really need to listen to this. But if you're
Like most of the rest of people.
right.
Yeah.
But if you're, if you're not going to the top 5 school and you haven't been recruited and you still want to get into this industry, go find Jim Cramer. Read his books. They're basic, but they're good.
Yeah.
And they're helpful. Stay current. Find what try and get involved with what you enjoy. It makes life a lot easier.
So you're I would say you're let's say midpoint in your experience. What do you see for yourself, for the industry, for the next 10 or 15 years? What do you want to contribute? What do you want to do?
I don't know. I think I want to be the equipment manager for the Vegas Golden Knights.
Okay. You know what? We've talked about that. And why don't you talk a little bit about that? That's been, was not expected.
Yeah.
Vegas got an expansion team, and this was after we had the massacre here, which was so tragic. And the team has, it's almost like there's magic really in their skates. They have outperformed the entire league. Yeah. Now I know you're a Rangers fan most of the time. Yeah. But tell me what that means.
I am a Rangers fan. The only conflict I had was a couple of Sundays ago when the Rangers came in. And everybody said, "Who do you want to win? What are you going to wear?" I didn't wear anything with team colors. I said I want a tie, and then whoever wins in overtime, so be it. So I wanted both teams to get a point. Bill Foley, it's amazing. I mean, he had a vision. I was a little skeptical of it. I mean, I'm a season ticket holder. The town, this is not really a hockey town. It's it's in the desert. It is quickly becoming one. There is a real bond between the city, and these guys couldn't have come in at a better time. What we were talking about, October 1st, and the players have been amazing. I mean, their interaction with first responders and the victims, and just the fans in general. Their practices are, when you contacted me today, their practices are open. Most teams don't have open practices, and they're doing everything they can to build awareness and get the kids involved. But talk about inefficiencies. Markets are inefficient, and when we're talking about year in year out, how do you outperform the market, or how do you make money? You find inefficiencies, and they were, I think, before the team was actually drafted, I think a couple books had them at 500 to 1 to win the cup. Yeah. Now they're in first place, which is unheard of, and I think they're 8 to 1 to win the cup.
It's probably a good bet.
Yeah. their over under for total points after 82 games was 66. I think they're right at 60, right before the halfway point here. They're not just at 41 games. I think they're at 60 points.
Yeah, amazing.
So, yeah.
Well, and it's not. We've got the Raiders coming. We've got the Aces in the women's NBA. Probably an NBA team, maybe an MLB team,
Yeah.
and Vegas is on its way to being on the map it's already on the map worldwide for being an entertainment capital, but it may be a sports capital.
Yeah,
truly.
It's funny when I do travel. Like I went to Spain this past summer, and first I would tell people I'm from New York, and they're like, New York, and then you would say, I'm from Las Vegas, and they were like, "Oh, Las Vegas,
They love
Las
it.
Vegas." They do. They love it.
And that's a good way to kind of end our discussion today. I mean, that's what this is about. It's there are people, obviously, that help make our industry what it is, who create that lifestyle, which is known around the world. It's not just in Vegas. Now it's everywhere in the world, pieces of it. And I want to thank you, David. I mean, we have been friends and will continue to be. And I know, for one, I appreciate that, the role that you play as someone who's out there making bets, investing in the future of the industry with companies that have achieved, and the information that you compile to pursue that is amazing, and also a big supporter of the town. So it's great to spend the time with you and to kind of send the message out there that there are careers that people can pursue, and there are people who exemplify what those careers could be. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it as well. Look, I think what you're doing is terrific. You found a real niche. Again, sort of below the firms that I'm associated with back in New York, the larger investment banks, they need a minimum of revenue generated to advise clientele. So it's usually a market raise of like $100 million of debt to get to their $2 million minimum. And you have found a great niche to find these companies that have promising product or services that are smaller, and able to find the people that are willing to get involved with these companies. And it's really been fun to watch you to build it.
Thanks.
And it's you provide a great service, and you become. You're clearly one of the foremost experts on esports, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I like to root for the underdog sometimes, and thank you for tuning in to our second podcast with David Wolfe, expert equity investor in public companies in the gambling sector. Great to have you learning more and more about the gambling lifestyle. Please tune into the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast, and please provide comment and feedback. Thank you.